What are you expecting from the United States? What are you expecting from the new Biden administration?
Well, I had a very good discussion with Secretary Kerry last week. And look, we're really pleased that we have an administration in the US which is back in the global fight against climate change. That's very good news. It's great news that on the first day in office, the president signed an executive order to rejoin the Paris Agreement. I think that sent absolutely the right signal to the world. And of course, the commitment to net zero by 2050. We are going to work closely with the US. And indeed, if you look at our approach to climate, it is now very much aligned as well. Of course, the world will also look to see what the US itself does in terms of its emission targets and also in terms of finance, which is a big issue, particularly for vulnerable countries, in terms of getting finance, public finance, but also private finance flowing to supporting climate action in vulnerable countries. You know, there is a figure of $100 billion a year. There was a commitment made by developed countries to support climate action in developing countries. And it's a totemic issue, and it is a matter of trust. And one of the things that I have been saying, and I will continue to say, is that this is something that we have to deliver on collectively.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the financing, because that's where the pandemic in some ways made this conversation a lot harder. I mean, here in the U.S., the energy is going to be spent on a relief bill, and it's a lot of question marks as to how much President Biden's going to be able to get for any kind of climate plan. Forget emerging markets that are just trying to deal with the virus itself. How do we manage this?
Well, Alex, I think there are two issues about this. One, of course, is, you know, if you look at the UK, you talked about Prime Minister Johnson, about the green industrial revolution that he's set on course. And this is about putting public money, but then also leveraging in many multiples in terms of private funding to get our economies going. And it is about jobs. And you know, we've shown in the UK that green growth is possible. Over the last 30 years, we've managed to grow our economy by 75% and cut emissions by 43%. But going back to the issue of climate finance and supporting developing countries, that is absolutely vitally important. And one of the messages that I get when I talked to countries which are vulnerable, countries which are at the front line of climate change, but aren't actually responsible for the position that we're in right now. What they say to me is that, of course, they completely understand that developed countries have managed to raise significant funds to support their own economies, but they then contrast that with the fact that we haven't yet got to the $100 billion. And that is why we need to make sure that at the same time that we are supporting our economies, we're supporting jobs and livelihoods in our country, we must also support vulnerable countries as well.
Alok, Sharma, you bring up the Boris Johnson government. How committed really is the Boris Johnson government to the green agenda? We've just seen the green lighting of the first colliery in the UK for 30 years. I think we've also just seen the green light for the biggest gas-fired power station in Europe. Those two events don't speak to a government that is committed.
Well, I would say to you that the Prime Minister in the UK is totally committed to the green agenda. As I said, we set out his plans for a green industrial revolution. You know, we are, as far as we're concerned, this is also about driving growth and driving jobs forward. We set out our own plans in terms of cutting emissions by 2030 by at least 68% on a base year of 1990. And I think, you know, if you ask people around the world, they will tell you this is really ambitious. We are world leading on this. We were the first country in the world to legislate to go to net zero by 2050. On the issue of coal that you raised, I mean, the first thing I would say to you is that, you know, we have been leading the world in moving away from coal use. We founded the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And on the particular issue that you've raised, on coal, this is actually about supplying coking coal for the steel sector, and it's actually not thermal coal for power. But look, I mean, you know, what I am working on in my role as COP president is driving that change, that energy transition that we need to see around the world. So we have an Energy Transition Council. We have ministers from around the world who sit on that. And this is about ensuring that we have clean energy available around the world. And actually, there's been a lot of progress. I mean, you know, take the offshore wind sector in the UK, nascent just a few years ago. We now have the biggest offshore wind sector in the world because the UK government stepped in. We provided a mechanism, the contracts of difference mechanism, and that has meant that we've got investment from the private sector flowing into the UK, and we want to do even more in that sector.